I'm John Hazel, automation expert and business strategist.
And I'm Kevin Miller, software lead and seasoned podcaster.
And this is the Automate and Elevate podcast, where we help you build systems, create leverage, and scale your business.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the most common psychological conditions that prevent people from having success. Today, we're going to dive into imposter syndrome and how to deal with it. So, yeah, John, I mean, as a software engineer, this is a pretty common terminology. You feel like you're never good enough, that you never have the skill set to actually accomplish the job. But once you actually do it for a while, you find out that you are actually capable. But is imposter syndrome something that you've experienced before?
All the time, over and over. And I think it's like, for me personally, it is very prominent because I specialize in so many different things. I don't specialize, I'm a generalist. And so I do all these different things. And then I feel like, well, I'm not doing that full time. I haven't been doing that, for 2 decades, 40 hours a week. So I'm not really an expert at that. And then I start to talk to people around me about it. And they're like, oh, you're on the cutting edge. You're like beyond anybody else I've talked to about it. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I do have something valuable to bring to the table.
So you know the psychological condition being that you've experienced it many times. So why do you think that it's something that's reoccurring and that even though you know that you'll eventually be able to get the job done, that initially you feel like you're not able to do it?
Yeah. We just get in our heads. We um I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. One is like you hear all kinds of information, you hear all kinds of things on podcasts and like this different places, and you hear it and it sounds maybe so polished, and then you think like, oh, like they know so much more than I do. And usually it's like we all have different pieces of information, but we all have valuable knowledge to bring to the table. I mean, it's important to be humble and to not think you already know everything, and you need to be continuously learning because we can never know it all. But we also have to. It also could be arrogant to think that you're not um, sufficient. Ironically, it's like there's this type of pride that comes with believing that you don't have what it takes, that you don't have anything to bring to the table.
So like how are you able to personally overcome, like, a lot of people, they feel like they can't do it and they end up stopping. So what enabled you to push through that feeling and keep going until you were able to get accomplished whatever you sought out to accomplish?
Yeah, there's a few elements. One, kind of unfair advantage that we have available to us now, but you have to be careful with, is AI. I can chat with Claude and be like, I feel completely unqualified for this. And then you have to be, the reason I say you have to be careful is because AI can be sycophantic. So it might just like try to hype you up when maybe you actually are underqualified for it. But a lot of times Claude will ask me questions and be like, well, what what things have you done similar to this in the past? And I'll say, well, this and this, and here's the outcome. And it's like, okay, you have proof, so it can kind of serve as a reminding tool, right? Which brings me to another point, a classic trick of like having a note of wins, of like personal testimonials. Like a website has to have testimonials to establish authority. Sometimes we have to do that for ourselves. We have to like remind ourselves of our own authority, establish authority with ourselves. And so having a note that you can go back to and be like, okay, these are the things I accomplished. Sometimes that's just your resume, but sometimes you need something a little more extensive. And then of course, talking to people around you that truly know you and have experienced the successes, and they can remind you of those things. So that, like, that's, I think, the first thing. And then the second thing is starting to actually tackle the problem wherever you're feeling imposter syndrome. Usually it's because there's this big problem that you're facing that feels huge. And so then starting to tackle it. And for me, I learn all kinds of different strategies over the years, but I always come back to GTD, Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. This happened last night. I was feeling overwhelmed because my inbox was overflowing, and it was like really hard for me to like get anything else done because there's all this mental clutter from like I don't know what I'm missing, I don't know what's priority, I don't, so I had to get back to my basics. And sometimes I have to spend a few out. Last night I was up till 4 a.m. Just cleaning out inboxes basically, and like establishing a new CRM and some fundamentals. But I had to declare bankruptcy. I use a email client called Spark, and so the advantage of Spark is you have all your personal emails, and then you can group like notifications and newsletters. So personal is like somebody's actually emailing me. Notifications could be like a bill or whatever. A newsletter is a newsletter. So I had to declare bankruptcy on the newsletters and notifications, just archive all of those in one swipe each, and then process a couple hundred personal emails to get back to inbox zero. But once I did, I was clear headed and I could prioritize and I could focus again. And that's like one of the principles of GTD is basically your inbox is not the place to keep things. Your inbox is the place things come in, but then you have to have these external systems where you're placing things so that you come back to them at the appropriate times. And so once I do that, and then once I go into another principle in GTD is the horizons of focus. So if I have this big project that's intimidating me and the imposter syndrome is coming as a part of that, then I got to start breaking that project down into what are the next actions. And sometimes that means working backwards from, okay, what's the actual desired outcome? And then what are the steps that get us there? And sometimes it's working forwards and just saying, what are the next three very next actions that I need to take to make progress on this project? And usually if you get three next actions down, then you start to feel some relief and peace about it. And like, okay, I do know how to get this thing done. I know how to get in the right trajectory for this thing, right? So a lot of times those two things go hand in hand.
So imposter syndrome, that's pretty much the feeling like you're not qualified to do something when you really are. But like, when do you know that you truly are not qualified to do this and it's best for you to kind of detach from this particular project versus you actually being qualified or you actually being able to get qualified? And yeah, how do you differentiate between the two? And when do you know like when it's time to eject from a project or whatever you're intending to do?
Yeah, I have had that happen in the past where I took on a project that was above my skill level, and eventually I had to say, "This is, I'm sorry, but you got to find somebody else for this." I thought I understood what you needed, and I thought this was within my scope, but it's actually beyond it. And um, I think you if you're diving into it and you're like, I have no idea where to start. I don't know what the beginning, the middle, or the end looks like. I just know that they want this thing done. And I've tried self-learning. I've tried YouTube. I bought a course on Coursera or Linda or whatever. I, have tried these different things, and I've spent the last day or week like trying to learn and trying to figure out how to get in. And it's like you're gaining zero ground whatsoever. I think you do need to be realistic with yourself and realistic with whoever it is you're working with. If this is inside of an organization, it's something that your manager has told you to do, then I think you have to be realistic with your manager of like, okay, I'm doing everything I can to try and get this thing done, and I have no idea where to go. And if they're a decent manager, they'll at least like help unblock that and help you move or assign it to somebody else. But if it's you've taken on something for a client that you realize you just can't do, then you got to call it. At the same time, though, we have to push ourselves and stretch ourselves. I always think of there's a good docudrama about like Steve Jobs and Wozniak and Bill Gates and like everything that was happening in the advent of personal computing. And there's this scene where Steve Jobs and Wozniak go into this basically like a Radio Shack type of place, like a local computer shop. And they had committed to this guy. They're building these computers for him and selling them to him. And he was like, "What are these? I thought you were building me like the whole personal computer with a basically like I don't know if he even had the language for it at the time, but like monitor, keyboard, mouse." And they're like, "No, this is what you ordered. This is what you get." Is basically like these motherboards. And then Jobs is like, "But you're gonna love our next product," basically the all-in-one, right? And like the Apple was born from that, the Apple One, I think. And or maybe the Lisa or something like that. But anyway, so then they walk out of the shop and Steve Wozniak's like, "What are you doing? Like, we have no idea to build what you just committed us to build." And I like think about that. And sometimes I have to push myself. And I'm like, I'm not going to push myself so far where it's like I'm committing to something that requires a team of thousands of people and like infrastructure that's way beyond what I can do. But you do want to sometimes commit to something that's a little beyond what you've done before, and then remind yourself of how you've overcome things in the past and push yourself there, right? But then don't be unfair to people. So when it's time to say I'm in over my head, then you got to say it so that people can make other arrangements.
So yeah, like realistically, failure, it often is not final. You can recover from it most of the time, but if you're not careful, failing at something like taking on a project you weren't able to complete, it can create an emotional state where it feeds on itself and you increasingly become more and more negative. So like, how do you avoid getting into this cycle of negativity because you failed at one particular project?
Yeah. I think the people that succeed the most are the ones who have the least fear of failure, and who and they like failure is painful for everybody, right? But it's kind of like you build calluses, right? Like if you're working with your hands all day, you build calluses and you get tougher skin. And so if you work in cold call sales, you get thicker skin. You're used to hearing rejection constantly. And it doesn't bother. And that's why like it's a really good place for people to start in their career is in something like that where there's a lot of rejection, a lot of failure, and you're able to persevere through that because you develop thicker skin, you develop calluses, and then you learn how to persevere. And because of that, every failure becomes a learning, and you learn something, you get feedback. Now, it is possible to be stuck in a failure loop where you're never learning anything from it. And so always, you should always find ways to get quick feedback. So sometimes I'll even like have, an AI transcriber transcribe a sales call for me. And then I'll put that in Claude and say, what did I do wrong here? How can I improve? Right. Or even, having somebody else on the call that can give you feedback after the call, or recording it and playing it back for somebody. So you want that feedback, you want that learning. So figure out what is it in your industry, in your role, where you can have a quick feedback loop so that you can just constantly learn and get better and let those failures be things that propel you forward.
So like, when earlier we talked a little bit about becoming like overwhelmed because, for example, just in your inbox, there's so much stuff coming in. And as an entrepreneur, that's just like a minor example of what's going to really happen. There's so many things you have to do, so many people you have to deal with. It just seems like the tasks are nonstop. So when you're faced with just this overwhelming abundance of things to do or information flowing in, how do you take your time and parse everything and make sure you're not getting overwhelmed to the point that you just feel like quitting?
Yeah. I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but I go back to GTD principles. Like, if you haven't read the book, Getting Things Done by David Allen, like, read the book. I don't know if the podcast is still out there, but when I first heard about this back in 2019, they had an active podcast that was really good. And so I like consumed all of the content from the podcast. And then after that, I was like, okay, I got to buy the book. And I bought the audio book, the iBook, the physical book, and like highlighted it up, listened to it, and I applied it. I put it into practice. And when I haven't always been consistent. It's like, it's hard to be like, to take the full GTD system and be consistent on it. But when you do, you have so much like peace of mind, freedom, because you know everything's in its place and you're going to address it at the right time. And then instead of just like reacting to things day to day, you're actually like grabbing life by the horns and taking a proactive approach to things, right? So because you know what your projects are, you know what your priorities are, and every week you're reviewing your system and saying, okay, this project is my top priority. I've got to get these next actions done to move this project across the finish line. These other things, I'm going to move them into my someday maybe list. Like, these are deferred. And then at the end of the month, I'll review that list and see if there's anything that needs to come back onto my active projects. And like, when you do that, it sounds so meticulous, because it is, but when you do that, you're working on the things that provide the highest value, because you also have like a daily, a weekly, and a monthly review where you're checking your scorecards and you're seeing like, are the activities that I'm doing producing the revenue that I need, right? So and then there's another thing there, which is the 4 disciplines of execution, which is a great model where you set your wildly important goal, you create a scorecard around that goal, and then you have to have like lead measures and lag measures. So lead measures are, what are my inputs every day? What are my controllables that every day, like when I was working in cold call sales, it's like every day we can add 15 people to sequence, where I'm going to send out an initial email, and then my system is going to prompt me to call them in sequence, and it's going to send some automated emails and all that, right? So that's called prospecting. So I'd get 15 people prospected that are in sequence now. And if I do that every single day, and then I place 50 phone calls a day, I'm almost, as long as like I'm a good salesperson and my conversations are good, I'm almost guaranteed to hit my quota every month at that point, because I'm controlling my controllables, my lead measures. The lag measure of hitting quota, once that time comes, like, I can't control that. It's too late. So you have to control your controllables. What are the inputs? This, for example, is a controllable. Recording a podcast or episode or 2 episodes a week so that we can publish them in the future. Like, these are controllables that, as long as we're doing them, I know I'm going to have content, which then we can feed in to create shorts and publish those to social media. And so if I'm controlling these controllables, I don't have control over how many likes and views and subscribers I get. What I have control of is how much content I put out and the quality of the content, because of my attention to what we're going to post, right? So when you're controlling so the 4 disciplines of execution, right? You got to set a wildly important goal. You got to know what your lead measures and lag measures are and set your scorecard. You got to have accountability through, sometimes daily stand-ups or weekly meetings or whatever is going to have accountability around those goals. And you got to check up on it, and you win. So those are the 2 things I would say to answer your question, that following the getting things done principles and following the 4 disciplines of execution are like how you ensure that you're working on the priority, because there's always going to be more to do than you can ever do. It's like, it's a constant thing. You're never going to get everything done and then be like, okay, once I've finished, then I'll be at peace. Like, we're finished when we're dead. Like, there's always more to do, right? Because we have purpose.
Exactly. To close this out, so a lot of times achieving goals and getting a reward for those goals, they seem like they can take a really long time. It seems like it takes forever. And a lot of times people quit because they're not getting to the goal as fast as they want. They're not seeing the fruits of their effort as fast as they want. So, when you're doing something that takes a long time to see the actual results, how do you avoid getting psyched out and quitting before, the tree bears fruit?
Yeah. It becomes easier when you've seen it work. When you've worked in sales or worked in marketing and you've seen how, like, I mean, it took me 3 months when I was in that role that I've been talking about. It took me 3 months to ramp up to actually hit quota. Thankfully, like that role for me was set up that way where I had 3 months of ramp time. But like because I followed the inputs, because I automated things and like figured out my own systems that worked with my personality, because I controlled those inputs, it succeeded. So it requires a little bit of faith and faith in yourself, faith in the system that it works. Um, a lot of times people say, "Oh, I tried that," and it's like, no, you try something when you actually give it a trial, when you actually give it the appropriate amount of time that it takes to bear the fruit of what you're trying to produce. You can't just like plant a seed in the ground and then expect to see an apple tree pop up the next day, right? Like these things take time, and so you have to listen to the conventional wisdom that says like this doesn't happen instantly. Some things happen faster than others, and sometimes people get lucky, and there's different things that create faster machines. But the point is like if you're not going to be able to go anywhere if your sailboat is tied to the dock. But once you get the sailboat out there, you can start redirecting things and you'll start moving faster and you can change direction and get to your destination. But you're never going to get to your destination if you're tied to the dock.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I think this is a great stopping point before we get out of here. What were the closing thoughts you want to leave our audience with, and where's the best place for them to find you at?
Yeah, well, if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, you're not alone. Please, obviously, there's tons of content out there. Like I'm sure this is not the first time you're hearing something about imposter syndrome, but sometimes we need to hear that. We need to hear encouragement. We need to reiterate. I've already given you some tips there, but keep subscribe, check out this podcast, other things that may equip you with knowledge that makes you feel even more confident in what you're doing. Follow me on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, all the places, and send me a message. If this was encouraging to you, please comment on it. Please send me a message because I'd love to connect.
Awesome, and we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.